So what happened in 2020? I was there and I really remember it, but I knew I had to wait some time to really understand what happened with the gift of hindsight. I needed to wait for the smoke to settle, so to speak. But I knew this day would come where I'd be reading books from different perspectives to get a full sense of what happened. The problem is a lot of politics can get in the way, and each side has its heroes and villains, and it's like neither side has any real incentive to explain what actually happened. So I'm doing the multiple angle approach. After 4 books, here's what I learned. First, Preventable by Andy Slavitt. This book is definitely from a liberal perspective. Andy Slavitt worked for the Obama administration, and it's very clear that he is a Democrat, and his message is the Democrats are right about everything and the Republicans, are, especially Donald Trump, are wrong about everything. I think at some point in the book he affirms every single liberal position. And so this was the least helpful of the 4 books by far. I don't read these kind of books well when they just sound like a big campaign speech. The thesis of the book is very simple. Trump cared more about himself than about saving American lives. The disease spread exponentially because Trump didn't listen to the experts and he didn't care what happened to the American population. The whole situation was preventable, as the book suggests, and if only we had a different leader in power, we would have been better off. This book is very unidimensional in its analysis, which is why I'm glad that Scott Gottlieb's book was also on my list, because the things that he elaborates on are the exact things that I feel cheated by not having in Andy Slavitt's book. Scott Gottlieb's was probably the most helpful of the 4 books I read. This book starts at the beginning of the coronavirus in China and what China did. China is the first culprit for what went so terribly wrong with the coronavirus, because the Chinese government refused to share samples. They were trying to downplay what was happening, and despite the WHO giving them a warm endorsement, that really wasn't the case. They were not cooperating as they should have. The second main failure that Scott Gottlieb gets into is the CDC. It's remarkable to me that there was so much confusion at the CDC level of what to do as this virus started spreading. There was a lot of governmental confusion at which organization was supposed to do what, and a lot of this fell on the CDC, and so the CDC was scrambling to try to figure things out, but they were not equipped for it. In a pandemic situation, there are many different kinds of tests that you want to employ strategically, and the CDC did none of that. Chapter 7 is comical in how poorly it went. Like, it could have been like out of a comedy movie, like Office Space, trying to cross red tape, running into this line, and then going into one absurd situation after another. The CDC ended up sending out faulty tests that were themselves contaminated with the coronavirus. So the tests arrived in labs and they were testing on sterile water, and it was showing positive for the coronavirus. The CDC was trying to save time by doing it in the lab itself, and so there's just lots of confusion. All along, the CDC is saying that tests are just around the corner, so a lot of the state labs aren't doing anything, waiting for the CDC. Meanwhile, cases are building and building, and it's quickly spreading beyond its control. After reading Scott Gottlieb's book, I had the analogy of a man is choking to death, he can't breathe, he passes out, falls on the floor, and dies. And then an hour later, officials show up with a big box of Band-Aids. To me, that summarizes the CDC's reaction to the coronavirus. Scott Gottlieb also points out the mixed messaging right from the beginning. He doesn't blame America for being confused about who to listen to, because there are different authority sources saying different things all throughout 2020. January 28th, Dr. Fauci said that we didn't have to worry about asymptomatic spread. Later, he said we didn't have to worry about masks. Then he said we did have to worry about masks, and the masks were the most important thing. President Trump saying one thing, CDC saying another thing, and it was a big communication failure. And a lot of that does come down on Trump, because he's the person that's supposed to be in charge, and telling the public what they need to know. I will say that that is, I think, a point in common between all four of these, that Trump's messaging was not good. It was very confused, very chaotic, and not what the American people needed to hear at all.